Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking what might honestly be one of the most shocking ranking shifts in modern sports history. We're talking about a two-time MVP, right? A transcendent generational talent who practically wills the Baltimore Ravens into Super Bowl contention year after year. But right now, we are staring down the barrel of a pretty jarring reality. Looking at the latest data, Lamar Jackson is set to drop from number 2 in 2025 all the way down to number 69 in 2026 on the top 100 list. For any football fan, you know that is a stunning plummet. It literally forces us to rethink everything about how we evaluate the quarterback position. So let's take a look at the sheer scale of this drop. 67. Wow. That is just a staggering number of spots for a reigning top-tier quarterback to plummet in a single calendar year. In the hyper-competitive landscape of the NFL, dropping maybe 5 or 10 spots, sure, it happens. That signals a tough season. But dropping 67 spots? That's an absolute earthquake. It's the kind of drop you usually only expect if a player suffers a massive career-altering injury or their entire offensive system completely collapses. It leaves all of us, fans, analysts, and for sure opposing defenses, wondering what in the world happened to trigger such a drastic reevaluation of a premier talent.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this isn't just about a bad streak of games. It's really a mystery built on a fascinating foundation of data and physical setbacks. How does a player widely considered by his own peers to be the absolute pinnacle of the sport suddenly find himself hovering near the bottom of the top 70? Well, to truly understand the gravity of this 67-spot plunge, we can't just look at what went wrong, we actually have to establish exactly where Jackson fell from. We've got to look at the completely unprecedented heights he reached right before this drop. Section 1. The historic 2024 peak.
Let's rewind just a bit to the 2024 season. The bar wasn't just set high, it was pushed entirely into the stratosphere. Jackson actually entered 2024 as the top-rated quarterback on the top 100, and somehow, he managed to raise the standard even higher. He turned in his absolute best statistical season as a passer, hitting career highs across the board. But the specific records here, they will literally blow your mind. He became the very first player in NFL history to throw for over 4,000 yards and rush for over 800 yards in the exact same season. And it doesn't stop there. He was the only quarterback to throw for 40-plus touchdowns while throwing fewer than 5 interceptions. He finished with 41 passing touchdowns and just 4 picks. Think about that level of efficiency for a second. Plus, according to NFL research, he became the first player ever to lead the league in both yards per pass attempt at 8.8 and yards per rush attempt at 6.6. He was, quite literally, the most efficient mover of the football on the planet, both in the air and on the ground. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how dominant he was. When you look at the fantasy data from that 2024 season, the gap between him and everybody else is just wild. Jackson's statistical supremacy is undeniable here. He racked up 430.38 fantasy points. The next closest quarterback, Josh Allen, way down at 379.04. That is a massive 51-point gap. Now, he was one of only 3 quarterbacks to throw 40 or more touchdowns that year, joining Joe Burrow and Baker Mayfield, but Jackson completely separated himself from the pack by also leading all quarterbacks with 915 rushing yards. He was just an unstoppable, one-of-a-kind game changer. Which leads us to this definitive statement right here. Despite all those mind-bending records and leading the Ravens on yet another Super Bowl run, Jackson was actually edged out of earning his 3rd MVP award in 2024. But honestly, the official MVP hardware didn't really matter to the guys actually lining up against him on Sundays. His peers across the league voted him into the number 2 overall spot on the top 100, clearly recognizing him as the undisputed best quarterback in the NFL. That was the peak, the absolute mountaintop.
Section 2. The 2025 season stumble.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast in his raw output. From that ultimate high in 2024, we have to pivot and confront the frustrating reality of the very next year. The numbers tell a super dramatic story. On one hand, you have that 2024 peak, 4,172 passing yards and 41 passing touchdowns. But then, look at the 2025 stumble. Those passing yards plummeted to 2,549, and his touchdowns were pretty much chopped in half, dropping to 21. His completion percentage also dipped from 64.9% down to 63.6%. But wait, we can't just look at these numbers in a vacuum. To understand why those stats hollowed out so drastically, we really have to look at the physical toll that season took on him. So here is the context that completely explains the statistical drop-off. 2025 was an incredibly trying year for the two-time MVP, basically because his body wouldn't let him stay on the field. He missed 3 games early in the schedule due to a hamstring injury. Then, just as he was starting to find a rhythm late in the year, a back contusion forced him out of another contest. So in total, he was limited to just 13 games. And you can see how that lack of continuity clearly impacted his ball security, right? His interceptions crept up to 7, and he lost 7 fumbles. So the big takeaway here is this wasn't some sudden loss of raw talent. It was a really promising season completely derailed by untimely nagging injuries. And that brings us to the most devastating impact of those specific injuries, summarized perfectly by this quote from our sources. In between those missed games, he didn't move much like himself. I mean, think about what that means for a player like Lamar Jackson. Through 6.5 seasons, he is already the all-time leader for rushing yards among quarterbacks. His mobility is quite literally his superpower. But in 2025, hobbled by a bad hamstring and a bruised back, his rushing totals collapsed to just 349 yards and 2 touchdowns. The most dangerous, game-breaking weapon in his arsenal was effectively neutralized. But hey, here is what is truly fascinating about that season. Even in a deeply compromised year where he stumbled, his fundamental brilliance as a quarterback still shone through in a few key areas. Check out this NFL Pro Insight data regarding his play action passing in 2025. Among qualified quarterbacks, Jackson ranked first in passer rating at an absolutely absurd 147.6. He ranked first in yards per attempt at 13.2, and first in completion percentage over expected at plus 11.9%. In fact, despite all the injuries and the missed time, Jackson still finished 2025 fourth in overall passer rating at 103.8. That's higher than 7 quarterbacks who actually made the Pro Bowl or were named alternates. Even when his legs were taken away, his arm and his processing remained lethal. Section 3, Blueprint for a Bounce Back. So the crucial point is that this underlying passing efficiency is exactly why we shouldn't view his ranking plunge to number 69 as the end of an era. Because guess what? Jackson has successfully navigated this exact same roller coaster before. Look at his top 100 rankings over the last few years. The last time he fell this low was on the 2023 list, where he landed at number 72. And what happened next? He completely reimagined his game, got healthy, and skyrocketed back up to earn 2 straight number 2 spots in 2024 and 2025. He knows exactly how to bounce back from the 70s to the absolute top of the board. Now, heading into 2026, finding himself at number 69, he is hitting that reset button once again, and you know he's doing it with a massive chip on his shoulder. Which brings us to the ultimate question as we wrap up this explainer. The reset button has been pressed, not just for Jackson, but for the entire Ravens organization, who are now operating under new head coach Jesse Minter. With a totally new voice leading the locker room and Jackson highly motivated to erase the memory of an injury-plagued season, all the pieces are right there. He still possesses the most dynamic dual-threat skill set in NFL history, and as we just saw with those play-action numbers, his passing efficiency is as sharp as ever. So will Minter's new system be the catalyst that unlocks Lamar Jackson's 3rd MVP run? Is this 67-spot drop just the setup for the greatest comeback story in recent NFL history? Honestly, if history's any indicator, I certainly wouldn't bet against him. Thanks for joining me on today's explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on Baltimore in 2026.